Do you think Keefe D is a fall guy for the Tupac assassination?
Oh yeah, yeah, and I get into that. I get into all the details of that, and CIA Drugs Are Us. I mean, I get clearly it's just a fall guy. It's obvious. I totally discredit Greg Kading, the you know police detective, LA police detective who lied and was caught lying in court, forced to resign early, according to Detective Russell Poole, a more honest detective whose life ended early when he supposedly had a heart attack in in the police department when he was handing in new information in 2018 about Tupac's murder, and so he was actually killed in that office, and I described that in that War on Tupac Shakur, and that was very sad what they did to him. He was a great, honest cop, believe it or not. And so he just I have some of his words on Greg Kading and how ridiculous Greg Kading's investigation was. I have Greg Kading caught describing the way he came to his ridiculous information from Keefe D. And then I have Keefe D when the CIA Drugs Are Us describing his absurd scenario of how him and his nephew supposedly orchestrated and carried out the murder of Tupac. It's all a joke, and that's why I had to make this film partly comic, because it is so absurd. There's so many absurd things. I had to make fun of it, but it's also so horrific that some people think it's too horrific to be made fun, to just make it into a comedy. But I feel like that's the only way to get through all the dark stuff in it, is to make some jokes out of it and parody songs.
Question from Nick. Was Tupac's mom deemed a crack addict because of the links to the BPs?
No, I think she really did develop a cocaine and crack addiction for a while, and then she got into recovery. If you read her memoir, you'll read all about that. She did, and so did Huey Newton did develop a white problem. White problem, and Afeni Shakur developed a white addiction. But Afeni Shakur did get into recovery. Huey Newton, I believe, did also get into recovery, and then they were done away with after they got in recovery. I show the evidence of, sadly enough.
Jojo, do you think the CIA is controlling other labels?
I do. The Time Warner and these other collaborating companies have just done so much work on behalf of, as I say, collaborating with the CIA. I think the CIA has had an influence on a lot of labels, and that's why you see all this ridiculously negative drug promoting kind of lyrics in rap and rock too. And the activist kind of songs are just pushed way down in terms of promotion. And Public Enemy, Chuck D from Public Enemies talked about this, and many other artists have talked about this.
Franz, do you know if the CIA's involvement with entertainment goes beyond the recording industry?
Oh, definitely, yeah. And I get into some of what was happening with movies, what they did, the way they targeted certain actors in the 1960s, partly with their CIA assets and the way they cultivated the Manson family. And that's a major kind of section of my CIA Drugs Us film.
Yeah, I've just listened to O'Neill's audiobook again to have a refresher on that. That's and mind blowing. All right, so Pearlie's wondering about modeling agencies' role in this. I mean, we saw that big time with Epstein.
Yeah. I mean, all I know about is Epstein's involvement, but beyond that, I don't know much about it, except I used to counsel, do HIV prevention work at methadone clinics, and I had a model in there who said that they were pushing her to do a lot of what we call brown, to develop that brown, brown chic, So these are the euphemisms I have to use, the code words I have to use, but. And that was big in the 1990s, and sadly enough, that Kurt Cobain, Courtney Love, Kurt Cobain inadvertently promoted. Courtney Love might have purposely promoted. I don't know.
GJ wants to know how much Martin Scorsese has put in his films.
I don't know. I mean, I like Martin Scorsese films, but I don't know what he's put in his films about anything like this.
Lil would like to be reminded of the name of your book.
So my books are, the first book is The FBI War on Tupac Shakur, State Repression of Black Leaders. And the second book is Drugs as Weapons Against Us. And the subtitle's long, but it's basically the CIA War on Musicians and Activists. Thanks for asking.
Willard is wondering whether you suspect that Aliyah was murdered.
I've heard some strange stuff about Aliyah, but I don't know enough to say.
People are asking. The people are throwing a lot of big names in the chat now, and your thoughts on them. So, I'll run them by you. Prince, the death of Prince.
Oh, the death of Prince was very suspicious because he was so talented, and he was fighting just for the rights to his own music because they basically contractually ripped him off and couldn't even use his own name. That's why he had to call himself the artist formerly known as Prince. And it just while I didn't seriously investigate Prince, it did fit the pattern of him turning much more activist later in his life, and then suddenly finding himself dead. And so it's just very sad because he was so talented.
Next big name is R. Kelly. Was he involved in this kind of stuff?
I mean, I've heard crazy stuff about what R. Kelly did, but I just haven't investigated him. I don't know. I'm sorry.
Next big name is one I grew up on in this country here, Wham. The death of George Michael.
Yeah, I don't know much about the death of George Michael. I know, he was talented, but I don't know enough about his death.
The death of ex-CIA chief William Colby.
Yeah, Colby did some horrible stuff for sure, but I believe he might have been the one that was being forced to testify in the 1970s church committee hearings, and so I believe he might have been done away with before they forced him to testify. It's possible.
Tom Petty.
Tom Petty, in my mind, was started out as a really talented singer and songwriter. And what I think happened to him is he got kind of manipulated into trying and promoting, acid and other psychedelics by the Grateful Dead, by touring with Jerry Garcia and sadly enough Bob Dylan. I think Bob Dylan was, of course, one of the most brilliant lyricists of his time. But when people came into his life and convinced him to start, taking acid, and it kind of hurt his brain, hurt his best songwriting. And so that happened about 1965. And his brilliant album, Highway 61 Revisited, was probably the last of his most incredible lyrics. And then kind of went downhill after that. Not that he didn't write good songs after that, but nothing can match the kind of stuff he wrote in, both Highway 61 Revisited and the albums before that were just some incredible stuff. Really some of the greatest lyrics, of our time. And so he shouldn't have peaked and never been able to match that ever since. But it's probably because there's two things they did to him. One was get him, taking so much acid and hurting his brain. But the other was some people I know, activists from that era, said, who published some of my work in the 90s, said that it was known that the police, U.S. intelligence tried to kill him when he was riding his motorcycle and he was run off the road. And who was this punk rock singer who was friends with Jacob Dylan, Henry Rollins, told me when I was just talking to him at a record store one time in the early 90s that he was friends with Jacob Dylan, and it was just known that his dad, Bob Dylan, had so many broken bones in that motorcycle accident that he was forced to take loads of opiates, pain pills for years, and just developed a massive opiate problem for the rest of his life. And that probably hurt him too, of course, being stuck on pain pills and maybe heroin too, I believe. Like Jerry Garcia, who he toured with Tom Petty. So that was the situation. They were, with Tom Petty and Bob Dylan, sadly enough, as they were taken off their game when they were introduced to tons of acid, and then with Dylan, with being stuck on a opiate addiction the rest of his life.
Chris Cornell and Chester Bennington.
Well, they were about to I forget if it was Chester or Chris. I think it was both of them were involved in exposing what massive abuse, SA, we have to call it the code name, but SA, abuse from childhood onwards. And they were doing serious activist work to expose all the massive PDF file is what we have to call it too, SA and PDF file. And the R word for against entertainers and in childhood onwards, and they were doing serious activist work to expose all that, and then they died suddenly, and it was highly suspicious. One of them, I believe one of them died in the same way as Robin Williams, that ridiculous hanging themselves on a door frame or doorknob or something ridiculous. That's absurd. Come on. And so, it's probably in my mind, a purposeful murder by intelligence to stop the exposure of their involvement in Epstein type essay and PDF file, transportation. I'm trying to use all the code words I can.
Thank you. You're doing really good. The next name is probably the biggest one, Michael Jackson.
Yeah, Michael Jackson, I just don't know enough about. It's, he does seem to fit the pattern of the attack of black, mainstream, incredibly popular black musicians who start getting more activists. Like Michael Jackson in his last tour had that song, "They Don't Care About Us," which was probably his most activist song, but his tour, if you saw the tour, I saw footage of the tour, he was showing Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and kind of, doing some things, dressing like a Black Panther and doing all kinds of militant music around that "They Don't Care About Us" song. It was very interesting. And obviously another very strange kind of death. So I didn't investigate it, intensely, but it did fit the pattern. So who knows? But was he involved in PDF file? I don't know. I mean, there's three accusers. If they were going to come out, it was a little strange they came out after his death, but I just don't know. I don't. With their testimony, I saw in the documentary, didn't seem to hold up. Though, obviously he had a bizarre life and he was abused. Apparently was abused by his dad in some way, different ways, with it, his internalized racism and stuff. So I just don't know more than that. That's all I can say about it.